All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, honestly, kind of counterintuitive philosophy from the psychologist Carl Jung. We're looking at the idea that disappointment, which is, something we usually try to avoid at absolutely all costs, is actually a powerful and entirely necessary tool for our psychological maturity.
Disappointing people reveal more truth about human nature than loyal people ever will. That's a pretty stark truth to start with, right? Because look, we often completely misunderstand loyalty. We like to think people stay in our lives because they truly love us, but in reality, often they stay simply because we're useful or convenient, or maybe because we're willing to tolerate things that other people absolutely wouldn't. Disappointment is basically the forced awakening we need to actually tell the difference.
So, we tend to think that a sudden disappointment breaks a relationship, but the truth is, it doesn't destroy it at all. It just reveals the relationship that was already operating in the background. And the profound, kind of paradoxical realization here is that our deepest suffering rarely comes from toxic people themselves. It actually comes from our own stubborn fantasy that they were somehow supposed to be different.
Section 1. The illusion of loyalty. Why we desperately idealize others.
Jung strongly believed that creating an idealized version of a person in our minds is literally one of humanity's most dangerous habits. Our minds desperately hope for consistency and this perfect idealized loyalty, yet actual human behavior so often reveals selfishness, manipulation, or envy, and when we're presented with that darker reality, we violently deny the evidence. Why do we do that? Because accepting the truth forces us to realize we were attached to a phantom. Confronting that reality hurts our ego way more than the disappointment itself.
So instead of accepting reality, we negotiate with it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Think about the friend who only ever calls when they need a favor, or the partner who suddenly withdraws affection. We tell ourselves, well, maybe they're just stressed, or maybe they didn't really mean it. We use excuses like, I'm probably just overthinking, or if I just become a little more patient, they'll change. We're constantly trying to artificially edit their behavior.
But here's the uncomfortable truth. Kindness without boundaries quietly teaches people how to use you. Your optimism is basically protecting them. Your excessive empathy is just excusing their bad behavior. And your patience, it's really only delaying necessary consequences.
Moving on to Section 2. The death of projection, when the emotional fantasy shatters.
What Jung calls the death of projection is exactly that moment when you stop seeing your own unfinished emotional needs reflected onto someone else, and you finally begin seeing their behavior without any illusion. You see, most people never truly see others. What they're actually seeing is their own need to be chosen or their need to feel important, projected like a movie right onto perfectly ordinary human behavior. Stripping that projection away is incredibly jarring for sure, but it is absolutely necessary.
We all hold on to this super comforting belief that goodness automatically inspires goodness in return, but the darker reality is quite different. Human beings often only respect what they cannot easily control. People unconsciously notice who over-explains, who fears abandonment, and who just keeps on forgiving. In many cases, unconditional goodness doesn't inspire goodness at all. It just inspires dependency, manipulation, or even silent contempt.
And this creates a really unsettling progression in our relationships. Now, it doesn't usually happen through some cartoonish evil intent. It's simply self-protective human nature. First, discomfort arises when the illusion starts to crack. Then, the mind scrambles, inventing explanations to completely avoid the truth. And finally, an unconscious distancing begins as our awareness grows. Once that illusion drops, the entire dynamic changes shape.
Which brings us to Section 3, confronting the Jungian shadow, the hidden traits we refuse to acknowledge.
Okay, so when we talk about the Jungian shadow, we are talking about the hidden aspects of the human personality. Things like envy, neediness, manipulation, and the desire to control. Basically, everything the conscious mind completely refuses to acknowledge. Now, most of us pretend these traits only belong to, bad people, but we completely miss the fact that our everyday friends, our partners, and yes, even ourselves, frequently operate straight from the shadow just to protect our own fragile egos.
When you really let the illusion drop, everyday social behaviors completely reframe themselves. Think about compliments. Suddenly, they can be decoded as a rehearsed performance. Getting attention starts feeling highly transactional. Even apologies start sounding carefully edited to avoid taking on any real guilt. Why is this? It's not because humanity is entirely fake. It's just that basic survival taught people how to wear masks long before they ever learned true self-awareness.
And here is a deeply unsettling reality. People often love the version of you that keeps them psychologically comfortable,
The very moment you start healing, or you start actually setting boundaries, your evolution silently breaks an unconscious emotional contract you had with them. You suddenly become less controllable, and their natural reaction is to pull away.
Let's look at Section 4, the silence of clarity, the psychologically violent transition to truth.
In the aftermath of all this disappointment, you might think, well, I'm just becoming cynical. But wait, cynicism is assuming everyone is fundamentally bad. True awareness is simply noticing that people are deeply divided within themselves. Just as Jung understood, people are walking contradictions. Someone can genuinely love you while simultaneously resenting your growth and secretly competing with you. Both things can be true at once.
Let this sink in for a second. Words are edited. Behavior leaks truth. Human actions are psychologically just so much louder than words. Our nervous systems are incredibly perceptive, right? They detect manipulation and hidden motives long before our conscious minds are ever willing to admit it.
So disappointment is actually a necessary catalyst. It forces our perception to change way faster than our emotional attachments ever could. You move from that initial illusion and emotional fantasy right through prolonged patterns of disappointment. And that eventually leads you to a deep internal silence and detachment, arriving finally at a cold but very real, uncomfortable clarity.
And this perfectly brings us to a foundational concept in Jungian psychology called individuation. It's the process of separating your perception from your projection. It's learning to see people without injecting your own unmet emotional needs into them. This is where true psychological maturity actually begins. It's not about writing daily affirmations or doing surface-level self-improvement. It is the psychologically demanding act of seeing people exactly as they are.
Finally, Section 5. Finding peace in reality. Losing relationships to save your identity.
People would rather lose relationships than lose identity. If you've ever wondered why true accountability is so incredibly rare, this is why. Deep reflection requires a sort of ego death. If someone's entire self-image is built on being the victim or maybe being superior, they will completely distort reality and willingly abandon your relationship long before they ever abandon their precious identity.
But once you grasp this, you finally achieve true awareness. You vigorously stop participating in these unconscious emotional contracts. You stop expecting permanence from temporary people. You stop confusing basic attention with deep, real loyalty. You stop interpreting someone's inconsistency as some alluring mystery. And honestly, most liberating of all, you absolutely stop trying to heal those who are actively committed to misunderstanding themselves.
Ultimately, true peace does not come from believing everyone is essentially good. It comes from finally seeing people clearly. Enlightenment isn't about just imagining figures of light everywhere you look. It's about making the darkness conscious. It's about completely letting go of the desperate need for people to be anything other than exactly what they are. Because once those illusions are gone, you stop asking how to make people see your value. Instead, you start asking, why was I trying so hard to be valued by someone incapable of perceiving me clearly in the first place?